Okay, now that you've got your software environment set up, we can dive into our first piece of real content for the course. So I'm going to be going over the basics of JavaScript, which is a language that's kind of like Python meets Java. Or you can think of it as like Java without explicitly having to set the types of any of your variables, or even sometimes to not have to declare them, although that's dangerous. So JavaScript is like Java as a chainsaw is to a butter knife, I guess you would say. So if you're not careful, you can sort of cut your leg off with the chainsaw pretty easily. It's a little harder to make a mistake and cut your leg off with a butter knife. So you have to be careful, and I'll try to keep you on the rails in the course. But it's a pretty neat language. We're only going to scratch the surface, but I think you'll see you'll be able to do a lot even just with that. Also, before we move on, I want to point out that this is a very good link for documentation and tutorials in JavaScript if you want to read more. It's the Mozilla Foundation has some great resources. Okay, but before I really talk about JavaScript, I should talk about something else, which is HTML. So let's go to a common website, the so-called portal of the internet. Okay, so every website has HTML, hypertext markup language, that is some syntax for determining how and what to display on the screen. So HTML by itself is just a static language, so it's just for formatting, purely for formatting. But on runtime in the browser, it's actually dynamic. So for example, if I right-click on this element here, and I say inspect element, it'll take me to the section of the HTML code that gave rise to that element. And actually, as I sort of hover my cursor over different parts of the code, it'll highlight where they are. So let me actually change this to something, this is kind of a stressful thing. Let me change it to something a little more positive and relevant to the class. So if I keep drilling down here and expanding these, I'll eventually get, okay, so this is a href, this is a link here. So what I can do is expand that even more and eventually get to the text. Wait, I have to go a little further, sorry. That's the link, but inside of it, there's the text. Okay. So let's change this, actually. What we're going to say is Chris Trailing gets Best Course of the Year award. Pick not related. Okay. And once I hit enter, you'll see that it's actually updated the content there. But, you know, you've certainly seen websites change without you having to go modify the HTML. So really what JavaScript was defined for was for web developers to client side, so as the page is running on your computer, change HTML content dynamically. So that's why JavaScript was developed. So you notice I have this thing up here. It's got a lot of stuff that you probably don't normally see when you're in the browser. Let me just show you how to bring that up another way. So if I hit F12 in Firefox or Chrome, that'll bring this up. All these different options here. So we were in the inspector a moment ago, and that allowed us to drill down into different HTML elements in the website. But let's for a moment pop over into something else, the console. This is you're going to use this a lot. So this is a lot like the normal terminal or the console that you would see when you were developing in Java or C++. It's just built into the web browser, which is really cool, actually. You don't need to, everybody has this, they just don't know it. So this is one of the reasons JavaScript is so cool, is because you don't even need to install a complicated software environment. It's already there for you. Now, you can see a whole bunch of scary stuff, whatever. We can ignore most of it. It's just Reddit being sloppy, I guess. I just want to point out that Reddit has this little thing here that says, using Reddit at work for Reddit. So they're trying to recruit for people who try to look at their JavaScript and see how messed up everything is. Okay. But so the cool thing about this terminal is, so it tells you everything that's going on the website that you're looking at, JavaScript-wise. And you can actually write JavaScript on the fly. So those of you who have used Python have probably seen this sort of thing. JavaScript is an interpreted language that you can just evaluate new stuff on as it comes in. So I can say, for example, x equals 10. There we go. And now I can say x times 2. Okay, that gives me 20. Nice. Actually, you notice something even nicer in the modern debugger, or in the modern console here. It'll actually show you the result before you even hit enter. So I can say x times 2. See, look, it's giving me a little preview of the result here, 20. I can say x times 3. Okay, what if I want to say math.pow x2? Okay, that's 100. So that's squaring x. So that's cool. So the arithmetic operations are looking pretty similar. I can also do x mod 2. Okay, so x is even. So divided by 2, it has a remainder of 0. X mod 3 has a remainder of 1. Okay, so you should be pretty familiar with all that stuff. Notice I never had to give x a type, right? So I could just flat out say x is 10 and kind of figure it out. So what happens then if I what if I say x over 3? What's it going to do? Well, if you divide, it automatically allows for it to be a floating point number, so it'll convert from the integer to a floating point number. Okay, fine. This is really neat for testing things out, and I will continue to sort of show examples in the console, but it's not really the best for developing your full program. So what we're going to do now is just create a basic HTML file that will open up in the browser, and we'll write some JavaScript in that instead. And we'll just keep refreshing the page with our live server. Okay, so now I'm going to go over to Microsoft Visual Studio Code, which you should have on your computer now. I'm going to open up a folder. So I'll go to my graphics directory. In my case, it's a little convoluted because this is how I set up the modules for you guys. But so we're in week 1. So that's my folder I'm going to work from. Okay, so you see I have all the different parts of the module. Fine. So let me open up this file first. So I'm going to have an HTML file and a JavaScript file. So HTML files have the extension .html, JavaScript files have the extension .js. So the HTML file, let me actually get rid of this for a second. This is the basic, this is like an empty HTML file. So let me just right click and I'll say open with live server. Okay, so now this opened up here, nothing really very exciting at all, just a blank page. If I hit F12, I see nothing in the console except live reload enabled, which just means that Microsoft Visual Studio Code is going to be able to refresh this every time I change something. So let me actually kind of put this over here so we can kind of see that at the same time as this. And you'll see how it refreshes automatically. Okay. So let's write a little bit of JavaScript. So right now, okay, nothing really exciting is going on, but there's actually, so these are called tags, these little HTML elements here. So there's, when you're starting a tag, you have it in these angle brackets here, and when you're ending a tag, you have left angle bracket, front slash, and then the right slash. So this is the beginning of the HTML tag, which starts the whole document. This is the end of the HTML tag, so it's saying end the document. You don't really have to worry about this too much. I will always provide you HTML code, but I just wanted to mention that. Okay, now the script tag says, okay, begin script and then end script tag. Now everything in here is going to be interpreted as JavaScript. So now I can actually write some code. So I can say x is equal to 10, like I did before. And if I just do that, I'm not really going to see anything. Okay, so it just refreshed the page, by the way, when I did that. In order to get things to show up in the console from these things that you write externally, you have to say console.log whatever. Okay, so now when I refresh this, you'll see 10. There it is, popped up. Let me make this just a little bigger for everybody. And actually, I'm not going to be doing much with the page here. I'm just going to be working the console, so I'll just bring this console up here. Okay, cool. So that's how I output stuff to the console. Oh, and gee whiz, I forgot to do console.log hello world. Okay, so strings look exactly the same as they do in Java, right? So you got the double quotes there. Anyway, so now we've got a hello world in the console. It's telling us, okay, this came from line 8 in this HTML file. And then this when I logged out X, it came from line 10. Okay, so that's pretty nice. Okay, now for a variety of reasons, I usually don't want to write that much JavaScript inside an HTML file. I actually kind of want to make a separate file for it. So you probably saw a moment ago I had this file test.js. I'm going to delete this. I was messing around before. Let me write my code in there instead. So I'm just going to copy and paste this in here. And so to include that file within this HTML to make sure that it actually runs that JavaScript. So right now it doesn't know about it. You see nothing happens. What I'll do is, as the script is loading, as the HTML is loading, I'll put in a script tag there before even the body of the document, before it even starts to draw anything on the HTML page. I'll say script src equals test.js. So that's just saying, let's include a script. Let's pull in all the code from this test.js file. And we'll do that before the HTML document even starts. Okay, so now you notice the stuff comes now. But it's telling us that okay, the hello world is on line 1 of test.js, and the 10 is on line 3. Okay. So let me do something, slightly more interesting than this. Let me start to talk about functions or methods, whatever you want to call them. Okay, so let's make a function that squares a variable. Why not? Okay, so I'll say function square it, and then I'll call the variable x. Okay, so notice that was pretty nice. That was pretty easy compared to how it'd be in Java or C++. Again, I don't really have to specify types. I don't have to specify a return type either. I just have to say function, and then I'll have a list of parameters in the parentheses like I normally would. But again, those parameters also don't need types. Okay, so let me just say result equals x times x, and then I'll return result. Why don't I just return x times x? Because I'm about to demonstrate a pitfall. Okay, but that's it. Okay, so let's say we wanted to know, well, what's maybe our multiplication table is a little rusty. Let's say, what's the square of 5? So okay, so I'll say console.log square it 5. All right, so we get 25. Nice. So this is calling the function. It's doing that evaluation there, and then it's returning the result. Okay. Let me do something else. Let me actually say, okay, console.log result. It doesn't seem like I should be able to do this, right? Because like in Java, usually that would be out of scope of this method, right? Let's just see what happens. Okay, so this now is starting to get a little weird. So the scope of this variable is actually global by default. So if you just say variable equals something, that variable has global scope. And here's the first little part of the chainsaw, right? So you got to be really careful with this. And I will give you an exercise to do on Wednesday where if you're not careful about this, you're going to run into an infinite loop, and you're not going to be able to figure out why. Okay. So, and actually, the reason that I'm giving you that exercise because somebody made an infinite loop this way last year, and it took me a half an hour to find it because it's so not obvious. Okay, so here's something to keep you on the rails. And this was introduced in 2015. So it's fairly recent, but it's really good, and it helps you to write much cleaner JavaScript code. So if you say let result equals x times x, well, then the scope is going to be within the method here. Okay, so now if I try to run this code, it'll print 25, but then it'll say uncaught reference error, result is not defined. So on line 7 now, it doesn't know what result is anymore. And that's great. That's exactly what we want. So all I have to do is say let. Every time you declare a variable, just say let variable equals. That's a good rule of thumb. Unless it's a constant, then you can use the word const. Actually, let me try to do that. Actually, yeah, I don't think that'll affect the result here because this doesn't change. Let me get rid of this now because that's not going to work anymore, right? Okay. So that's okay, but now, so let is the one way of doing it, const is the other modifier. Now if I try to say result equals result over 2 or something, it's not going to like that. Okay. So I can't change something once it's a const. So actually const is okay for this, but just use let by default. Use const if you're like, I don't want to change it after this point. That's fine. So const or let, but usually let. Use those. Okay. Just one more thing I want to point out, and then I'm going to have you do a little exercise in the browser just to make sure you're following along. If you are in Visual Studio Code and you type / and then hit enter, it will automatically set up a doc string for your functions, which is really nice. So this allows you to document your parameters. So I'll say, okay, what I'm expecting is sort of a real number. So I'll say real. That means it can be an int, it can be a float, it can be whatever. It'll be determined at runtime. And then I'll say, okay, yeah, this is the number I want to square. Fine. And then at the end I say returns, and then that's also going to be the result. Okay, fine. So if you document your methods this way, first of all, it's good to get into the habit of doing that. Actually, normally what I do is before I even write the method, I'll just write the docstring. So I kind of set my intention. And if you write it in this format, then it'll automatically compile into documentation like you would see in Mozilla. So just as an example, let's look up. So if I say JavaScript square, yeah, we'll say POW. Okay, fine, the POW method. So it'll automatically, there's a program you can run to turn it into HTML that looks really nice. So POW has 2 parameters. So if they did their docstring where they had parameter base and parameter exponent, and then they had the returns thing, and you can format it all nice like this. So get into the habit when you write your own functions of doing that. Okay, so now I'm going to have you do a little exercise on just doing the quadratic formula, just to make sure you can do arithmetic expressions and everything like that. Okay.